Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of System Link for Wednesday, the 22nd of January, 2025. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Mike Hazelton from the Xbox Guide. Good evening, Mike. How you doing?
Oh, yeah, I'm good, thanks. Excited for this one.
Yeah, lots to unpack. We always try and have a jam-packed show normally around announcements, and given that we've got the Xbox Developer Direct coming up, we've just had the Switch 2 announcement, we've got PlayStation obviously making some big moves behind the scenes, we've got our logo represented, the green, the red, the blue, all aspects now being covered tonight, and we're going to dive straight in with a breakdown of where PlayStation are at right now. Looking at the fact that this big push to live service was a major part of their strategy under Jim Ryan, certainly, before his departure in 21. And this seems to now be very much a pivot away. Concord obviously being perhaps the most high profile, given that that was actually a shipped product that then was pulled within 2 weeks of its release. But there have been multiple projects now that have either been completely binned off, recycled into something new, or in some cases we have sort of third parties like Arrowhead with Helldivers making something that's really hit and done really well, but it's the first party that seems to be struggling with this approach. Is this kind of a marking a shift back to traditional PlayStation, focusing on the single player big budget AAA?
Yeah, it's a bit crazy, isn't it? There's been so much reaction to this, overreaction, I think. And it's it's been talked about for probably the best part of a year at least, that Sony are maybe moving back away from this strategy. But they've basically had one game that's failed, which is Concord, and I'm sure it cost them a lot of money. But Microsoft had Redfall that failed, probably to the same extent. In terms of investment and money lost on it. I don't feel like that is enough for someone at PlayStation to say, "Oh shit, this is the wrong move. What are we doing? Let's switch back." I know that they've had some leadership changes and some structural changes, but for me, it's just not what I would expect a billion-dollar company to be making these sort of kind of it seems like a knee-jerk reaction. Because on one hand, you've got Helldivers, which has probably offset Concord, at least in part. I mean, if it was first party, it would certainly have offset Concord. So I don't know if we've seen enough to really justify the move back. I mean, Marathon, I'm not hugely confident about, just with some of the stuff going on at Bungie.
Well, and also, given what happened with Deviation Games, Fair Games, I think, is potentially now.
Yeah, I was going to say
Fair.
Yeah, Fair Games doesn't seem. I don't know. No one's ever been really positive about that. So I don't know. It's one of those, and we say it again. We say it with Xbox sometimes. It's like they're just making bad decisions. They're investing in the wrong games and the wrong studios. It's not that the strategy. Well, the strategy to move away from single player, story driven games is a bad idea, because that's PlayStation's bread and butter, if that is actually what their strategy is. But to kind of diversify isn't a bad idea, because people would say, I don't want a PlayStation because all that you have on it is single player games. So it just depends. I don't think we know enough, and people are jumping to conclusions. Is my take on it, really.
I think it feels very sort of shareholder led. They've looked at the top 10 most played games that have consistently been titles from the previous generation that are all either IP that are familiar, and or some element of live service with microtransactions, etc. And they wanted the piece of that pie. Warner Brothers chased it with Suicide Squad. Just like how Redfall didn't have a history of making co-op multiplayer live service titles that evolve over time, they were making sort of first-person Sims. Rocksteady didn't have a precedent for developing titles like that. Everything they'd made up to that point had been the Arkham titles. And then suddenly Suicide Squad is a live service seasonal game, which was obviously a huge failure and a massive loss for Warner Brothers. It's just yet another example of how chasing after that sort of monetization route, making that be the driving force for your creative decisions, doesn't seem to be panning out, not just for PlayStation and Xbox, but for other major publishers too. It's a kind of wider rejection, I think, from audiences that this market has become very saturated, and there isn't really a huge amount of space. And if you're going to wade in there, you better have something special. to say.
Yeah, but I also think that, especially if it's going to be free to play, you have. I would personally invest a lot less in the initial launch of the game, or I'd have like a an alpha playtest, open beta for like a long period, a couple of years before the game comes out, to actually check its, meeting expectations, and so that you can pivot and things.
Yeah.
I am a bit surprised that the two games that we heard about this week would have taken the entire studio's resources, or
Right.
like 80% of the studio's resources. And everyone's saying, PlayStation don't have a roadmap now because they've cancelled all their games. We don't know that's the case, do we? I think it's quite likely that these could have been small projects that were at some of these studios, because most studios have multiple teams, and
Yes.
then they've still got the main team at the studio that's making what they're
Yeah.
used to making.
The one asterisk to that, I suppose, the perhaps the exception is Naughty Dog. They admitted that when they tried to be a multi-team studio, either their resources were stretched and their crunch became untenable. And with The Last of Us Online, when that was cancelled, they literally said we need to pivot now to what we do best, which in this case we now have learned is Intergalactic. So we've kind of know that we've got Ghosts of Yotei and Intergalactic coming from their first party, but beyond that, we don't really have a clear picture yet of what that's going to look like.
Yeah, and I think Sony could certainly have, reassured people, or they could have leaked something to say, if it was Microsoft, whatever, Jez Corden would have
Mm.
said, "Oh, don't worry, guys, they're still developing something at whatever, Rare."
Yeah.
But because we haven't heard anything like that, because it's a bit more of a closed shop, yeah, people are understandably worried. But like for me, it's would be incredible if we don't get, some big PlayStation first party IP that we haven't heard about already, announcements this year. Surely. Like I just can't see it not happening. And I don't think they would have been prepared to cancel those games if that was their lineup. If the lineup was so hinged on live service games.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing to say every live service game is going to be bad. Like
No,
surely
not
you
at
would
all. And
rather
actually,
have some games coming out, unless they're literally as bad as Concord, and
yeah.
they're going to. But that's not the case with, or even the live service games that you mentioned. They're not. Concord was a special case because
Yes.
part of the problem was that they charged for it as well.
Yeah, and also just the significant investment over such a long period of time. You'd have hoped that would have yielded a better result, given the
Yeah.
pedigree of the studio. But I look at something like The Last of Us Online, what that was going to be. If that was just a live service version of Factions, which was the multiplayer in the first game,
Exactly.
that is still being played today, not just by me and Johnny. It's actually being played. It's got a really dedicated community that still is engaging with that game, and it hasn't been given a title update for years, let alone new content. It still thrives, and part of me wonders if they just put 30 quid, you know, 30 quid price tag on it, released it, even if it was a bit bare bones to start with. I still think after 3 years, Naughty Dog must have had something to show there, even if it ended up just being an iteration on Factions 1. So, Big Manny, good evening. Good to see you, bud. Thank you for tuning in. So, it is a really strange situation that we find ourselves in there, and I hope, given the huge success, the tremendous critical and commercial response they had at the end of the PS4 era, that has kind of arguably carried into PS5 between all of those iterative sequels that have landed really well. I hope this does see now them reading the terrain and perhaps now shifting back to what they arguably do best. They are, in many ways, the leader, the front runners for that reason, and we'll see. Proof will be in the pudding, right? About how that plays out.
You would prefer that these games are cancelled and they shift back to single player
Broadly,
games?
yes. I don't think there needs to be this sort of wide sweeping don't explore it at all. I think that's also a mistake. You've got to be able to have a diverse portfolio, and we've addressed that already. But I think don't put that on Naughty Dog. Let Naughty Dog cook what they cook best. Bend Studio having their sci-fi online title cancelled. Frankly, I actually think the cancellation of Days Gone was the mistake, the sequel to that game. Give them a chance to really push that and iterate on that and improve on that.
Like you said, I think Last of Us Online was a mistake to cancel it, but
Right.
because the pedigree of the studio, they've shown they can make a multiplayer game.
Yeah, in multiple cases.
why
Uncharted
would
4's
they have-
multiplayer is great.
Yeah, why would they have fucked it up? Even if you had to pivot it to say the live service stuff is kind of taking away from what we want to do here. Let's just release the multiplayer, as a standalone game.
Yeah.
Unless literally someone came up with a concept for Intergalactic and they're like, this is so good, we just want to make this. I can understand that. Maybe they're a bit, burnt out on Last of Us or something, but...
And Part 2's development with all the leaks and the delays was probably...
and the criticism as well.
And the criticism and the sort of the narrative around that must have been pretty draining as a studio. Plus also just the subject matter of what they were dealing with. It must have been just in terms of the content and the art they were making. There's a toll, there's a price to be paid there. So, no, I don't think a sweeping shift away from these titles would be what we'd want. I think it's actually just they've hedged their bets on projects that turned out to be the wrong bet. Right? They've taken a risk, they've swung, and it's not landed. That's where the stepping back and the perhaps refocusing of their resources does make sense. In some cases, though, especially Deviation Games, that's the most egregious for me. A studio that never actually put out a game. Essentially, they bought them on the idea, on the basis that they were going to make something live service and interesting, and then nothing materialized after 3 years. I think those are the investments, the decisions that felt a bit knee-jerk. I still don't quite understand the Bungie acquisition either. I don't really get that. Because it's not like they had an FPS franchise that would remain then suddenly exclusive. They've done exactly with Destiny what Xbox did with Minecraft. They've kept it multi-platform. And they even said going forward that all of Bungie's titles were going to continue to be published elsewhere. So if they don't have an existing franchise for them to weigh in on, despite rumours that they were the ones that had caused them to pivot away from Last of Us Online, they don't have an existing... Killzone isn't something that's in the conversation right now. That would be the one that logically would make sense to me. I didn't understand that acquisition and what they've gotten. Whether they've ended up just chopping up that studio. What Bungie looks like now, I feel like there's elements of parallel to the early Rare acquisition at Xbox, where they were put on Avatar designs and Kinect games.
Yeah.
I wonder what that structure looks like and where that studio is.
If I feel as though they just didn't want Microsoft to buy them.
Yeah, do you think it was a tactical move?
A bit, yeah.
Because I really don't see the benefit to Sony here. I really don't get that. So we have another interesting... Sorry, Pumpkin trying to change my tabs. Oh, hello. Another interesting sort of Xbox Game Pass lineup that was unveiled earlier this week. A couple of big hitters actually in there. Citizen Sleeper 2 looks really cool, and Sniper Elite Resistance we already knew about and is launching day and date. Very excited for that one. I think you and I are going to be diving into the co-op on that potentially. That might make a jolly stream. We'll put a poll up for that in the Discord to see what people want us to play next on a Saturday. But I'm finding it harder and harder to get as excited as I did with those updates because of the way they're formatting them. I know we've discussed this before, but this one, with the 12 new games coming to Game Pass, I was like, whoa, that's like the Activision buyout dump, or not the Activision, so the Bethesda dump when we got all those titles. And at least 6 of them are just stuff that's already on Ultimate that's just going to Standard. I think it's confusing messaging. It's really odd.
I think that's literally how they phrased it this time as well. It was like 12 12 games coming to Game Pass. Yeah. Like officially, which is not true because half of them are already on Game Pass.
Yeah.
But I like the quantity is definitely an improvement certainly over December when I think we had 8 games. Because we already had the first batch announced, although there are only a few of them for January. And like you say, there's a couple of interesting ones in there. Lonely Mountains Snow Riders is out today, which looks quite cool. But it's a smaller little thing. Starbound I really want to play as well, which I've never played before. Obviously
some nice indies in there, and Rebellion, developers of Sniper Elite, have a history of really supporting Game Pass. We've had previous Sniper Elite 4 and 5 on there. Zombie Army Trilogy has dropped in there. I believe Strange Brigade also at one point came to Game Pass, at least for a year. So they have a really... And also I know that Atomic Heart... That's the Bioshock game. Sega. Atomfall, thank you very much. Coming in with the live correction. Atomfall is coming later this year. That single player FPS that they're making. So nice to see that studio has found success on there, because they wouldn't be signing those contracts if it wasn't worth their while. So especially at this point now, we've seen that it's clearly paying off for them. So I think some good titles, certainly on the indie side, and having Sniper Elite in there as a bit more of a heavy hitter is really nice. But the PR around it, it's naff, it's confusing, it's not going to be easy for people to understand.
presumably, there must be a significant number of people in the standard
Yeah.
tier, because they're putting games in there at quite a good rate, but not, nothing's going in there that's making headlines or that people say, "Oh, I've got to get a standard tier of Game Pass now
Hmm.
because this game's dropped in." It isn't working like that,
I
but
just think there should
it
be
does
separate
seem as though
updates.
they're focusing on it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Just separate updates, man. Just have the ultimate as a
At least
drop.
separate it on here. Like have
Yes.
the
Yeah.
ultimate at the top and standard at the bottom,
And
or
show it. Show
something.
if you got to have it in one
Yeah.
graphic because you want one PR hit because that goes with your messaging and your plan. Just have that formatted in a way you've got your ultimate updates and your standard updates, as opposed to having just the tiny
Yeah.
text of where they're going. Because the thing is, the ultimate ones currently say ultimate standard or cloud PC, and like it's just always really really confusing and it's not clean at all.
I was also hoping that we would get, because it's the developer direct tomorrow. I was hoping we'd get something announced there that would be coming to Game Pass. But this kind of, unless it's like
A shadow drop.
a bluffing, yeah, and they're trying to make us think that nothing's coming because they've released this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Which I feel like that's not
you never
beyond them,
know.
is it? That's something
It's not beyond them,
we've had
but,
hints of that before, for sure.
yeah.
Um,
But yeah, it was a little bit. Yeah, I feel like we'd be unlikely to get like we had with. I'm trying to think. Like what they've done it with Yakuza in the past, where
Yes.
they put like multiple
Yeah,
Yakuza
yeah.
games on at a time, or Persona, or yeah, some of the Final Fantasy stuff that I think we had at Gamescom.
Sorry, I'm very conscious of the fact that my cat is currently nuzzling my microphone over here. I think it's actually slightly covered by the System Link Chiron that we have at the bottom here. But he's just sitting directly off. Hello.
In every episode at the moment.
I know.
Can't get enough of it.
Why does he allow this? Do you know what I mean? I mean, I'm literally hot. Any cat would have clawed my
Yeah.
face off live on Twitch right now. But he's just absolutely loving his belly rubs. Well, shall we carry on? Very good. Very good, Pumpkin. So please look forward to your children's book. So hint, hint. So we've also got a few other bits of Xbox news to kind of cover. We've got obviously a recent leak, potential look at the Doom, the Dark Ages release date coming in May, apparently, if leaks are to be believed. And that is, I believe, featuring the developer direct, isn't it? So it's likely that we're going to get probably that reveal of some kind at that event. I think actually, if something like that has leaked but South of Midnight hasn't, I actually would expect perhaps a window, a summer 2025 release. I think what we're seeing in the direct, they're going to follow the previous template and it's going to be stuff coming this year. I reckon they're probably keeping Fable back for an E3 Summer Game Fest blowout. And then if they announce a November release for that, that's a strong calendar year for them for first party. If that sort of
Call of Duty to avoid though. GTA,
Yeah.
possibly. If GTA comes out this year,
Not convinced GTA is 2025, so lock that in January right now for a System Link bet.
they need to find that out, because I think if say GTA was November, then I think they delay Fable to
Okay, so I'm going to do
spring
this
next year.
We've talked about this off air. I'm going to do this right now. We've talked about having some high stakes bets, and I'm going to lay it on the line right now. Okay, if GTA, I think it's going to be 2026.
Okay.
If GTA comes out in 2025, I have to introduce an episode of System Link by using Pumpkin like this, and I have to sort of pantomime his voice from behind him, and he will do the intro to System Link. Okay, so that's my wager I'm putting on there. That's what's gonna.
Sorry, you're saying if GTA comes out this year?
Yes, let's lock it in. So
Okay, yeah.
I'm saying it's going to get delayed. It's 26. If it comes out in 2025, I have to do a Pumpkin intro to System Link. That's the bet. So we're going to lock that in. Please look forward to the new tracker, the bets tracker that we'll put into the Discord.
Yeah, I'm not saying GTA won't come out in 26.
Okay, you're not getting into the action.
I think it's like probably 60% likely to be delayed to next year. But all I'm saying is if it comes out this year, I think Microsoft will delay Fable if they get notice that it's coming out.
Right.
Because
that would make sense logistically for me if you've got like Avowed kicking off sort of Q1, Doom in Q2, South of Midnight in 3, and then Fable in Q4. That I think is actually a really strong first party year for them. And actually, for the first time, 3 of them would be actual Xbox first party, not Bethesda or Activision. Plus, obviously, this year's Call of Duty you'd have at the end of the year as well.
And
So
there'll be another game or two, I should think, from
yes,
like smaller games from various people dotted
yes,
in there that use
absolutely.
the usual stuff. Um, yeah, I don't think they need Fable and Q for if GTA is coming out, because it was too stacked this year with Call of Duty and Indiana Jones. That
Yeah,
it felt, well, they have Flight Sim as well. It just felt too heavy, but
just bottom heavy,
um,
wasn't it, with Hellblade and then everything else. So I think that
yeah,
that cleaner release slate. I don't think we see State of Decay this year. I don't think we see Gears as in releasing this year. I think we see them. I think there'll be some kind of showing
yeah.
of them, but I don't think we see Gears, State of Decay, or Perfect Dark releasing in 25. I think they're going to be 26 releases, and I think that's pretty safe actually to say that. I think that's not a bad 18 months if you then take it from Avowed to what is probably going to be the last of those three, which is State of Decay 3. I think that's the furthest away. If you sort of between those two over the next 18 months, that's a decent. I actually think that's decent
Everwild.
unfair.
Phil's been playing Everwild. Where's that?
I'm not ready to make a bet on that, but I'm not sure that I'm not sure. I'm not sure that that game is going to see the light of day. Pumpkin, what do you think? Cool. So I can't help it. I'm sorry. I don't know what condition this is, where
they need to. Fable, for me, Fable is there with Starfield and Halo Infinite in the list of games that they can't fuck up, and they fucked up Halo Infinite and they fucked up Starfield, so they need to give Fable as long as it takes.
Let it cook, please.
Yeah.
On the subject of Xbox releases, there have been some additional rumours of other titles coming for Switch 2. The big one being Starfield. I feel like now I am, and I'll come to this later with the Activision performance report from Insider Gaming, but I am so struggling with the insider scoops, shall we say, citing nebulous sources as to be that apparently Starfield's coming to Switch. What's your take on this?
Like, it would make sense, I think, that as they're developing it for PS5, which I'm sure they are, they probably do it for Switch 2 at the same time, rather than doing them separately at some point, and they can release at the same time, and they'll have hopefully have the second DLC included as well. It wouldn't surprise me. Or Fallout. Like, Fallout is completely. It's not even an issue because Fallout's been on multiple formats already.
I think Fallout's the more likely
will be
of the two.
Yeah. Like, they could tie it in. We were talking last week. They could tie it in with the season 2 of the TV show.
Yeah.
In terms of release time, and considering the uptake that Switch 2 will have, or you imagine it will have. You said 100 million in the first year. I need a bet from you on that.
No, 20 million. 20 million.
20 million. Sorry,
in the first year, yeah. 100 million in the first year would be outstanding. But yeah, no, 20 million is what Nintendo
will be.
Nintendo said they're targeting 20 million.
Yeah. Yeah. Considering that and the how popular the TV show was, it would be a good platform to put it on for sure.
Yep, absolutely. Mentioned it already, and I found this very frustrating looking at this Activision underperformance piece. Sources, I believe, I've got to find the direct quote. Sources close to the Game Pass business claiming that Activision apparently has underperformed in their financial projections and has not delivered what was intended following the buyout. This, I think, is kind of using some of the, not, I suppose it's slightly more than rumours, but taking some of the quotations from Satya Nadella about that fork in the road back in 21 where they were looking at either making some big acquisitions or shuttering the business. They've kind of tied that in a little bit with this supposed report. I struggle to see how, like, when the revenue for the division was up 63% because of Activision, they cited it specifically in the last two financial quarters. I'm struggling to understand how that could then possibly mean that it's underperformed. Record Game Pass engagement, record day one signups, highest player retention. These are all things that are just reported because of the Activision buyout. I just don't put any credence in this report. I think this is completely wrong.
Yeah, and I think Jez Corden replied to it and said it was wrong. they've been as open as Microsoft ever are about performance, and to the detriment of the rest of the business. It's like the rest of the business is hardly doing anything, and then it's like Activision is all the growth in
Right.
Microsoft gaming. So it'd be hard to see how it's underperformed unless it's literally there's a percentage of people that are playing the stuff on Game Pass instead of buying it, so it's performing
Right.
less well than it was before they bought it, which yeah, I guess you could see, but um yeah, it's being blown out of proportion certainly,
I
and
think so. We could do with another
yeah,
subscriber update. That'd be handy. They could do
I
with getting
know.
ahead
We
of
just
this
have
and
to,
just being like, we've hit 50. We've hit 50 million or something. I think 40 something was
yeah,
the last. 43, I think, was the last count. So we
it's
could
always a worry when we don't
we
get
don't get
those
it.
those
Yeah.
figures because it should be
Especially
a good news
alongside
story.
like a developer direct where there's like a big PR push, or you've got Avowed coming out next month, which is obviously is Obsidian. It's something that people are really excited about. So it's we want to see that success and that transparency from them to offset a lot of these perhaps erroneous reports that don't really have a lot of basis in reality. But hey, we'll see. Um, so now our big deep dive for tonight is on Switch 2. And I threw into our Discord, our community question was all around the reveal, asking, have Nintendo done enough with Switch 2's announcement to convince you that it's worth it? Were you wanting a bigger leap forward, or does an iterative upgrade make sense? And I'm throwing that straight to Mike Hazelton from the Xbox Guide to kick us off.
I guess we should talk about what they showed. Everyone will have seen it, but it's bigger. The Joy Cons. Well, all the leaks were
Yeah,
correct basically, which is not great for Nintendo. But yeah, bigger. The Joy Cons are magnetic, have a magnetic lock on them. Some sort of mouse functionality
yeah.
appears to be on the Joy
I
Cons.
don't know if that leaked. That I don't know whether that was in any
Oh
of the
yeah, I think
leaks.
it did.
Was it
Yeah,
in there? Okay. So pretty much all of
yeah,
it then was laid out.
yeah, and that's obviously better kickstand, which I think was always gonna
Yeah,
happen. The USB on the top, I think that isn't there at the
that's
moment,
right.
or
The
the other way around.
kickstand was also part of the revision. It's part of the OLED version. So
Yeah,
that they've already kind of taken that step already.
yeah. Mario Kart shown, nothing else shown. So I don't want to always go back to Xbox, but Nate the Hate, I think, who leaked a lot of that stuff, also leaked that those Xbox games that we talked about last week or the week before would be launch titles. I forget what they were, Flight Sim and
And Master
Master
Chief
Chief
Collection.
Collection.
That's right.
Um, or at least they'll be in the like launch window maybe. So that'll be interesting. But I will get to your point. For this didn't blow me away at all. Um, and like I said on the show before, if it was going to be iterative, it wouldn't do anything for me. It needed
Hmm.
to really be quite disruptive, which to be honest was never going to happen, and the leaks suggested it wasn't going to happen. There's still space for them to do something with the mouse functionality. There's this C button. People calling it a C button, which isn't. I was watching the Digital Foundry piece on it, and they're saying it's unlabeled at the moment, which it wouldn't normally be unlabeled. So they're suggesting that it's not been labeled so that they can do something
Hmm.
funky with it when they actually announce properly reveal the console. Um, I didn't like the trailer because it's not a Nintendo for me, not a Nintendo reveal. The Switch original Switch reveal, while it was quite I don't know corporate, it was quite corporate, but the life that I like seeing people using it, and it was a bit more um, you could picture yourself playing the console and stuff. This, yeah, just didn't really do it for me. But having said that, I think the naming convention and the fact it looks so much like the Switch One, and they've just added a couple of bits into it to differentiate it, it will get bought by anyone who's still on the base Switch model. And probably over time, as they release games on it and don't release them on Switch One, naturally people will just buy it, and it will be a decent launch price, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think actually your sentiment was shared by Big Manny in our Discord, who responded with, "I don't think so, based on what we've seen so far, that it's enough of an upgrade from the original Switch. All the new features they've announced already seem like things the original Switch could have had anyway, and while I'm not someone who cares about graphics at all, I've heard a lot of people say it doesn't look like a significant graphical upgrade. So for me, I have no issue with the graphics at all because I don't buy a Nintendo console for that. I think actually what we've seen with the 720p screen handheld, with a screen that small, it doesn't matter. It mitigates the smaller resolution, so it doesn't really become an issue for me. Nintendo's art style and design works still on the GameCube, and that's not like gotten worse since then. So that side of it, I have no issue with. I also don't particularly get the Switch to play third-party games on it. Certainly, why would I want to on the original one, where it's sort of playing objectively the worst performing titles that are scaled back? It's great to have them on there, certainly to attract audiences to pick it up as a second console. But for me personally, that they're not really a big hit. I was very much hoping for an iterative upgrade. I didn't need my new Switch or the next Nintendo platform to be that big leap forward, but I can completely understand how it can sort of be like, okay, you know what I mean? It can feel like a slightly underwhelming reveal because the leaks didn't help. It was precisely what had been outlined there, and I think I can completely appreciate that a lot of people would have looked at that and gone, okay, tough to get sort of hugely hyped about it. Much like with the PS5 Pro, I had a bit of a minute convincing myself to get it. I got it, and it's great, but it wasn't like I had this big build-up, that sort of anticipation of the new console, which I did have for Series X. I did have that for this, because that was the start of this gen for me. So I don't think people's disappointment in the iteration is silly. I think that makes complete sense why people would feel that. For me, the issues that I wanted them to address, comfortability, form factor, seems to be the things that they're focusing on. The sort of the magnetic Joy-Cons, I'm hoping in practice will be better than the rails, and that given that the Joy-Cons are by far the worst aspect of the original Switch for me, I tended to, as a result, use the Pro Controller and play it docked. So its handheld status, again, I'm kind of a bit unsure on. So yeah.
It seems as though they're actually moving as much as they can be moving away from that. It's like, because the size, it's significantly bigger, seems significantly bigger, to the extent that you would probably struggle to take it with you. Well, not struggle, but you'd have to take a bag out to keep it in. It's not something that's really easily portable. It's more like the PlayStation Portal, which is designed basically to use in your house as a second screen.
Yes.
So they're almost like they're going back to Wii U kind of second screen kind of
in-house
thinking.
handheld experience, which is where the data is pointing people using it, isn't it? Like we've seen the PS Portal is being used. Well, I mean, it could only do that at first, but now supporting cloud functionality, it's clearly being pitched at like. I feel like it's being pitched at our generation. It's being pitched at like the sort of mid-30s dads who can't necessarily game on the screen without a child jumping all over them. It gives them the ability to have Bluey on in the background while still playing. And I could certainly see a value for that, both in what Switch 2 offers, what Steam Deck have already captured, and what Xbox are apparently exploring with a handheld. I think that market now is booming in a way that I kind of almost wish PS Vita had come out 10 years later, because then that would perhaps have found the same audience that now PS Portal and all these other platforms have. So I think that's interesting.
I think having the mouse functionality as well, that just doesn't work out of the house at all, because you need a platform to use it on. So the sort of games that you would imagine will make use of that, like people talking about Mario Maker and stuff, they're games that you can easily play at home and just make sense to be playing in that setting. Do you think, I don't know if this has been spoken about yet, Mario Kart, is that Switch 2 exclusive?
Yes.
Or was it Switch 1?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Nintendo don't tend to have a huge precedent for like elongated cross-gen releases. We often get
not elongated, but I mean it's launch title, isn't it?
No, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It tends to be like we've seen Twilight Princess, we've seen which was the GameCube to the Wii, and then
Breath of the Wild.
Breath of the Wild was Wii U to Switch, wasn't it? So we've seen big Zelda titles drop their launch titles as a cross-gen release. But I actually wouldn't be surprised now if Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is now Switch 2 exclusive. We got a vague 2025 release date. With Switch 2 coming out this year, I just can't see it being a Switch 1 title as well. I think they shift right across.
Well, yeah,
they go
certainly
that way.
if Mario Kart isn't, then yeah, Metroid certainly wouldn't. Like I think that'll be it. Then there's no reason for them to put them on both. Maybe in very specific circumstances, some of the Mario
Yeah,
sports games or
because
something.
they went to such great lengths to say at the end of the trailer, physical Switch games work on Switch 2. So that implies that that library is there to me. That's what I've taken from that. That library is now in place, and then you've got your Switch 2 games, your new Mario Kart, Metroid, all now Switch 2. But all your previous stuff will come forward with you. That was quite a big deal for me, actually. I have a huge Switch library of
Yeah,
cartridge games. So actually having the ability to just plop them in there is great. I really want them to confirm Pro Controller support, or if there is going to be a new version of that controller. I don't imagine we'll get that before the Direct, but in April. But that's really important to me because I love that Pro Controller so much. So whether I'm going to have to invest in a new one or they just support the old, I think at the very bare minimum, I'd want them to support the previous controller because it's in a pretty good spot. So certainly in terms of, like you mentioned as well, like the usage case with the mouses, the mice and stuff, the mouse functionality, the tabletop mode that Switch supports with the kickstand, its size, despite the adverts where it's like there's like a bunch of kids playing basketball in the background and they're like, what we should do, play NBA 2K17 on this in front of you. I don't think, given its size and sort of that lack of perhaps ease of transportation, that we'll see a lot of usage for that. It's nice to have there as an option, I suppose. Certainly if you're showing it off, it's an easy way of doing that. But truthfully, I mean, I'd love to know, I don't know if that information's out there, but I'd love to know the handheld to docked ratio of the console. I think that would be some fascinating data. For me, it's 95% docked because my Joy-Cons suck because of the drift and the
I
connection
wonder.
issues.
This is off topic really, but I feel like Nintendo would have made more money when they had a home console and a separate handheld because you would have had people buying both, as opposed to now you don't have a choice. You've got the Switch, and if it doesn't quite work for you as a handheld, which I think for me I don't use it as a handheld. Certainly Switch 2 being bigger wouldn't work for me as a handheld. I like I like the design when you can close the lid of something and you can put it
Like
in your
the
bag, and
3DS.
the screen's not going to get scratched and stuff.
Yeah.
Especially with kids.
Yeah, I wonder again what the breakdown there is. That like is having the two platforms, like a home console and a handheld, separate SKUs, maybe increases revenue, but does maybe having all of your teams designing for one platform then reduce development costs because they're not split between multiple platforms, having to scale things back. I wonder what that's another piece of data I'd love to have. What is actually the most cost-effective version of that? Is it better to just cycle everyone to one platform and that's what we're supporting, that's what we're iterating on, and that's what we're trying to grow, as opposed to sort of trying to cover every base where you've got like, because I mean they're the 3DS Wii/Wii U era, you didn't have a lot of games that appeared on. Very rarely did you have the same game.
Yeah.
Smash Brothers, I believe, was on Wii U and 3DS. There was like a two versions of that game that came out, but even then they would have been different enough that they would have been sort of designed bespoke for their platforms. So
it's not like you're spending $200 million making DS games.
Certainly hope not.
There's so much more simple. But maybe now with the graphical capability that you'd have to put into a handheld, like on Vita games were probably costing a hell of a lot more than DS games to make because they're effectively PS3 games, and PS4, I guess. But yeah, it was just an interesting one. If there is a gap, but I guess mobile's just filling that gap now. Games that people can play on their phones, so.
Yeah, and I've been wondering as well, just in terms of in my own personal life, my habits of gaming, is that I've often found it quite tricky to carve time for myself sat down in front of a telly. That actually there might be some, if I sort of maintain my sort of good self-care routine and I'm getting myself to bed at a sensible hour, that actually a little half an hour with my headphones in bed with a handheld might actually be quite a nice way of decompressing at the end of the day. And whatever that looks like, whether it's Steam Deck, Xbox's future thing, the PS Portal, or this, looking at that there's interest in that for me. The flexibility too of not having to be in my office, but I'm in the living room being able to play without taking over the telly. So I'm looking at that going forward, and whether Switch 2 will probably come first, certainly before any Xbox handheld drops, and before any sort of PlayStation follow-up to the Portal. Would you mind not biting me, please?
Any issue with it not being OLED?
No, not
Because
at all.
if you've got the Switch 1 OLED, you're not going to buy a Switch 2 LCD, are you?
Yeah, I suppose. God, but then again, I found the OLED thing really strange. I think that I'm not sure what Nintendo market they were shooting for really with that. That was an odd iteration for me. The screen will be, I would hope, using more iterative and up-to-date LCD technology. So I don't feel like it'll feel like a huge downgrade. At least you'd hope not. I think, yeah. So okay.
I think it would if you've been playing on the OLED.
Yes, I think if you're an OLED owner, which I can't imagine is a huge percentage of the audience, that I could understand being maybe slightly disappointing for you. Maybe obviously I'm probably a little bit biased there because I never considered upgrading my Switch. I know I'm Captain PS5 Pro, but I still have my launch Switch, which is
it needs a hardware,
great, but
like a performance increase, I think, for it to ever be worthwhile. But
yes,
I personally would like to see two SKUs, one just an OLED version that's more expensive. I think give people the choice if you've got the technology, and it's
sure.
I think what they're doing the Rockstar thing, which is to have a basic version and then release another version in 18 months that's got OLED, and people buy it twice.
I reckon they'd probably, given the amount of time it took for the OLED Switch to come out, it was like 5 years into its gen. I could see them holding, they love holding that back, don't they, as like a second wave when they've hit that 60, 70 million console shifted. They then 3DS XL comes out, and they save like some relatively meaningful iteration for like 2/3 of the way through the gen. It's always back half with Nintendo. We won't know obviously until PS6 is a thing how far in that PS5 Pro has ended up landing. Traditionally, it seems to be literally the mid-gen refresh, doesn't it? We saw that with PS4 Pro, Xbox One X. It was quite literally halfway through those generations, and it was needed too, because I feel like those consoles, maybe less PS4, more Xbox One, but they were a bit underpowered. I think actually having something like Mario Kart as the release game, given the tail that the 8 Deluxe had, don't forget that the Mario Kart on the Switch is just the Wii U game. There's been 2 generations now since we had a new Mario Kart.
Breath of the Wild was a Wii U game as well.
Yeah. So and that's still 50 quid on the eShop,
But I know I mentioned this to you. To me, it looked like the same game, and there's obviously more cars on screen and stuff, and some stuff that you spotted. But to me, as a casual Mario Kart player who doesn't play it very much, I wouldn't. If you'd shown me that, I would have said it was the Switch game, not a new game.
And I think sort of picture almost kind of affects that.
Yeah, I'm sure it didn't help, but that would be the issue for me. I think there's a hell of a lot of people that probably the game they play the most on the Switch is Mario Kart, especially families. And then for them to show you there's this new console, you can play Mario Kart. It's like, well, we can play Mario Kart already, and it looks basically the same. But there's 24 cars. It's already a clusterfuck for me playing Mario Kart as it is.
12,
I don't need another 12 cars on there. So I would have preferred something we haven't seen. Metroid doesn't work as a launch title, thinking about it, because it's the wrong audience. But a Mario game obviously would have been
well,
nice.
Also, I mean, the previous Mario Kart before, if you look at the sequence, Mario Kart 7 was the 3DS release, then Mario Kart 8 was Wii U, and then Deluxe was Switch. The jump from, like, a lot of the stuff they added in 7 are things I think people associate with 8, but it wasn't, like the flying and the underwater stuff. That was all 7. That was the 3DS handheld version. The only thing they actually added in Mario Kart 8, this is before Deluxe, was the anti-grav stuff, where they could, like, attach onto the track and go upside down. And Mario Kart 8 was explosively barnstorming in terms of it's like the one thing on the Wii U that was like unequivocally successful. Deluxe then drops with its then subsequent booster course packs with like 48 additional tracks. It still it doesn't iterate at all on the previous one. So that's, there hasn't been any meaningful change to Mario Kart for 2 generations of it, and it's still
Yeah.
the top seller. So actually, you suddenly show you can play with more people, and that's the one. I think
Did-
that's enough. I think that's gonna absolutely fly.
Well, do you? I think if it would be very very brave to put it on Switch 2 exclusively. But we'll see. We'll see what they do.
Okay, okay. I'm feeling bet-tastic tonight. I'm feeling good about that.
Do,
So I need to come up
do
with a.
you?
I need to come up with a wager.
Is it the case that it's like Smash Brothers?
Hmm.
It was featureful,
Hmm.
loads of maps and characters. It was like the ultimate Smash Brothers
Yeah,
collection. Is Mario Kart 9? Is it you all the tracks basically that are in Mario Kart 8 because it's a fucking same thing, or is it Nintendo at their finest? You get like 18 tracks,
yeah.
and then over the next 20 years they release
Yeah, it's
boosted
that.
tracks.
Because deluxe works so well. So it's absolutely that. We're gonna get a nice. We're gonna get like 6 cups. We're gonna get like a good, like 20 tracks. So that's like no 24 tracks. We're gonna get like 6 cups. One of them's
Yeah.
unlockable, right? So it's gonna be that's a solid like 24 tracks going on, and then we're gonna get the iterative DLC over time, absolutely, because they've put DLC. There was a DLC motorbike in Zelda, and it sold phenomenally well. So that works for them. It makes money. So clearly they're going to do that. Where the hell's Animal
When was
Crossing
the last
DLC?
DLC though? It's relatively recent, wasn't it, for Deluxe?
Yeah.
Yeah,
The final wave came out towards the end of last year. There was like
be a bit pissed if you bought that and then there's a new Mario Kart coming out.
yeah. Although I suppose a lot of people would probably have got it under the subscription, which was available like. So you get them just as they came out, but I don't imagine people were buying that individually. I mean, I just can't see that. I think they probably would have mostly been like, they would have probably got it through the sub. They'd have got like the Switch Online plus expansion pack thing. But I wanna lock something in here, so because I quite like it being spicy, and we'll put this in the bet tracker. If GTA doesn't slip, I've got to do a pumpkin intro. That's the first one, and then this. What I'm gonna bet is that Mario Kart 9. Or Mario Kart, insert subtitle here, is not a cross-gen release. So I'm going to lock in, that it is a Switch 2, not just launch exclusive, it is exclusive to that platform. And for the sanctity of the bet, because I know people will come back and check, by people being you, that it is not released on Switch 1. It is a Switch 2 only title. And now I need some kind of wager for that.
Well, I mean, the main thing is just that we record them in the bet tracker and
Absolutely.
we can be punished
The
accordingly.
punishment does give it an edge. I'll circle back on it. We'll figure it out. But yes, so I think looking ahead then, we've obviously got the reveal in April. We've got the kind of deep dive that we're expecting, and I imagine we'll then get either the launch lineup or a few games announced. They're normally pretty good with their like first 6 months. Like the Switch came out pretty weak in terms of like a diverse lineup. It was just Dance and Zelda and Snipper Clips, I think, with the 3 and Fast RMX. Like they were the only games out with it. Yeah, can't forget. But within 6 months we had Mario Odyssey, which was awesome. And they announced that, didn't they? I believe Odyssey was revealed at one of those shows, along with like ARMS and maybe Splatoon as well, I think was shown at one of those. So they're normally pretty good at outlining that stuff, and given that we have a £50 Donkey Kong Country Returns HD release that's kicked off this year, we're definitely winding down. Metroid's been given a vague 2025 release, so it's definitely Switch 2. I would imagine that will be... I think that's going to be Switch 2 as well at that point. If Mario Kart is, it's weird if Metroid
Totally.
isn't.
Yeah.
Because by that point, they want to push people there. They want to get their core faithful adopting it early. And Big Manny just come in the chat here. I've seen people discussing what looks like a Wonder Seed from Mario Wonder in the new Mario Kart. So it seems like each course will have a wild second version you can swap into mid-race, like in Mario Wonder. Very interesting idea. I think that could be really cool.
Yeah,
Some,
it needs something.
track
Needs something
variations,
like that.
maybe. Yeah.
Can't just be more cars for me.
Not just more cars, more tracks. You've got to have a mechanic in there, I think, that's
more cars, fewer tracks, by the sounds of what you're saying.
It's going to happen. Pumpkin is...
And yeah, obviously don't forget, we may be getting all the Xbox games coming to it as well. So that'll bolster the launch lineup.
Mario Kart 9 and Master Chief Collection dropping when the Switch when Switch 2 launches.
Not bad.
So I think I've got my wager I'd like to put down. So if Mario Kart 9 / and again, for the sanctity of the bet, the next Mario Kart title, so Mario Kart 9 mainline title, whatever it ends up being called, if that is a cross-gen title, I don't think it will be. I think it's Switch 2 exclusive. If it is a cross-gen title, I have to write a thank you letter to Shigeru Miyamoto and publish it in our Discord, thanking him for making it so that I had to buy the Mario All-Stars collection and they delisted it physically and digitally. I have to thank him for that.
Great.
Okay? Yeah. I have to be... And my letter has to can't just be a sentence saying, thank you, Shigsy. I have to be effusive in my praise for that wonderful business practice of them delisting it both physically and digitally. So, yeah, we'll lock in those two bets in the bet tracker. To wrap out our podcast this evening, Mike, where is Switch 2 sitting with you right now, following the announcement, following everything we've discussed, and looking ahead, obviously, to April? Perhaps, a better question, actually, what are you hoping to see from that event coming up in April? What would you like from them?
Yeah, just some innovation around the I guess the C button and the mouse stuff, so that at least we get the best of like the quirky, innovative Nintendo, and it's not just here's some more of the same games that you've been playing for the last 30 years. For me, like if my Switch broke, then I would buy a Switch 2, and knowing that all the games will work on it, that's great. But I wouldn't just buy one because my Switch is fine. And Mario Kart, I've got Mario Kart. I'm not interested in I don't play it enough as it is. So there would need to be new games from IP that we haven't seen for a while, not Zelda, because I've played enough of that. So yeah, I need a bit more new stuff, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we're talking about Xbox ports, we were talking about them earlier in the show, that actually, something like Age of Empires, if Age of Empires went on to Switch with the mouse functionality, that's a nice use, or some kind of strategy game was made like...
Yeah, I think Age of Mythology was rumoured. I don't know why you put Age of Mythology on it and not Age of Empires 2, but...
Sure. But then I suppose, like, if Nintendo have, like, whether it was... I forget they have a series, they have, like, a turn-based strategy game. Advance Wars, yeah. Some kind of, like... hexagonal.
I'm sure they will, yeah.
Something like that could be quite interesting, I think, maybe. And again, that's what I'd like to see is actually, because the technology we've seen sometimes is just like nice ideas conceptually, but they never get used. Like that weird IR sensor in one of the Joy-Cons, they never ever used it beyond 1-2 switch. So actually, if they're going to have this functionality and show it in its announcement trailer, show me games that utilize it, not just
the USB-C in the top has potential as well if they're going to do some crazy Nintendo accessories that stick on the top or something.
Love a peripheral, don't we, from Nintendo? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, some kind of javelin. that could be great. Well, folks, thank you so much for tuning in to the latest episode of System Link. You can find us on Threads, Facebook, Instagram, and our Discord at Burly Bird Media. Also, we're at Burly Bird Media on YouTube and Spotify and Podbean as well, where you can get the audio version of this episode every single Thursday, as well as our video on demand version saved onto our YouTube account. We will be back on Saturday with a Burly Bird Live, and for the first time we'll be putting up a poll in our Discord, people voting on which games they would like to see from Burly Bird Live. Mike, where can people find you?
You can find me at thexboxguide.com for Xbox news, aggregation, and occasional features, and at the Xbox Guide on Blue Sky and Threads.
Great. Well, thank you, folks, for tuning in. Big Manny, as always, thank you for your contributions. Really great to get your perspective on the Switch 2. And we will see you next time.
See ya.